So, 1947, India finally gains its independence after almost 200 years of British rule. But what did the Indian economy actually look like at that moment? What was the real situation on the ground that this new nation was inheriting? Was it a solid foundation ready for growth? Or was it something a lot more complicated? All right, let's dig in and see what the reality was.
To really get a handle on where India was in 1947, we first have to go back and see where it started. You see, before the British arrived, India wasn't some poor, underdeveloped place. Not at all. It had this incredibly vibrant, independent economy that was literally famous all over the world for its prosperity.
And look, this wasn't just local pride talking. This quote comes from a French traveler, François Bernier, back in the 17th century. He was just blown away by the wealth he saw in one region alone, Bengal, and he compared it to Egypt, another legendarily rich land, saying Bengal was even richer thanks to all its cotton, silk, rice, and sugar. And all that wealth? Well, it was built on some serious skill. India was a global powerhouse when it came to handicrafts. We're talking about these amazing high-quality cotton and silk textiles, beautiful metalwork, and incredible jewelry that people wanted everywhere. You know, the famous Daki muslin was so ridiculously fine, it was literally considered fabric fit for emperors and queens.
Okay, now let's jump forward 200 years, and wow, the picture could not be more different. This image here of farmers just struggling with the most basic tools, it really captures the reality for most of the country. This became the new normal, widespread agricultural stagnation.
So you have to ask, right? What on earth happened? How did one of the world's most prosperous economies turn into one defined by poverty and stagnation?
Well, the answer, it turns out, lies in the economic policies of the colonial government. And this is key. This wasn't some kind of accident. It was a deliberate, purposeful transformation of India's entire economy to serve a very specific agenda.
And here's the bottom line, plain and simple. The policies were never designed to develop India for Indians. Nope, they were all about one thing: protecting and promoting Britain's own economic interests. The game plan was to turn India into a giant feeder economy, a reliable source of cheap raw materials for all those new factories back in Britain.
And if you want proof, just listen to this. A British viceroy said this in 1894. He's saying that India wasn't just another colony. It was the absolute center of the British Empire. Its resources were seen as completely non-negotiable for Britain's own power and survival.
Okay, so that's the what and the why. But how did they actually do it? Let's break down the strategy and see how they systematically took apart and rebuilt the Indian economy piece by piece. Right? You want to control an economy? You start with where the people are. And in India, that meant agriculture. As you can see here, a massive 85% of the population lived in villages. Their entire lives directly or indirectly depended on farming. So, rule number one for the British: control the land, and you control everything. But here's the thing, instead of investing in the land, it was left to stagnate. You had land policies like the zamindari system, which meant all the profits went to landlords who had zero reason to actually improve the farms. The actual farmers who worked the land saw nothing. So technology stayed primitive, there was hardly any irrigation, and to top it all off, farmers were often forced to grow things like indigo and cotton for British factories instead of the food they actually needed to, eat. All right, part two of the strategy was something called deindustrialization. Now, it's a fancy word, but what it really means is the systematic takedown of a country's industries. This wasn't a natural decline, it was a policy.
And this slide, man, it just lays out the complete 180-degree flip. India went from being this world-famous producer of high-quality finished goods to basically being a giant captive market, forced to buy cheap, mass-produced stuff from factories in Britain. How could local artisans ever compete with that?
This table just makes the new reality painfully clear. Just look at the two columns. See the pattern here? India sends out the raw stuff: raw silk, raw cotton, raw wool. And what does it buy back? The finished versions of those exact same things. Finished clothes plus machinery from Britain.
You know, even the big infrastructure projects that were built weren't really for India's benefit. Take the Suez Canal. When it opened in 1869, it slashed the travel time between Britain and India. But that just made it even easier and cheaper for Britain to pull raw materials out and push finished goods in. It was like building a superhighway to make their control even stronger.
Now here's the really wild part. Under this system, India actually had what's called an export surplus, meaning it exported more than it imported. So on paper, it looks like India is winning at trade, right? Wrong. That money, that wealth, never made it back into the Indian economy. Instead, it was used to pay for the entire British colonial administration in India, to help fund British wars, and to cover all sorts of other expenses. It was famously known as the drain of Indian wealth.
So we've talked about the big picture, the economy, the trade, but what did all of this actually mean for the everyday person living in India? Well, the economic story quickly becomes a story of human disaster.
The numbers from this period are just staggering. Let's just run through them quickly. The overall literacy rate, less than 16%. And for women, it was a heartbreaking 7%. Average life expectancy, get this, just 32 years. 32. I mean, just think about that for a second. That's compared to an average of nearly 70 today.
And when it came to public health, well, there basically wasn't any for most people. The infant mortality rate was through the roof, an unbelievable 218 deaths for every 1,000 births. It was a direct result of extreme poverty and rampant disease.
So, after 2 centuries, this is where India stood. This was the economy and the society that the country inherited on the day of its independence. This was the starting line for a brand new nation.
And this final look at the workforce just hammers the point home. You have a massive 75%, 3/4 of the working population still stuck in that broken agricultural system. And manufacturing, the very thing that drives a modern economy, a tiny 10%. The economy was completely lopsided.
So let's just recap what India was handed in 1947. It inherited a crippled agricultural sector, a hollowed-out and nearly non-existent industrial base, a population suffering from extreme poverty and terrible health, and even the infrastructure that existed, like railways and ports, was designed to extract wealth, not to serve the people.
This was the hand India was dealt. This was the incredible challenge facing its first leaders. Looking at all this, it leaves you with this enormous question. How on earth do you even begin to build a new independent nation from here?